*3 months had passed since humanity vanished from galactic society, and the cracks in civilization were spreading faster than anyone had imagined. On the massive trading station of Nexus Prime, the usually bustling docks stood eerily empty where human cargo ships had once brought goods from across the star station. Commander Veltar, a proud Kaleri with blue skin and 4 arms, stared at the empty loading bays through the observation windows. His station had once processed millions of tons of cargo every day. Now barely a tenth of that amount moved through the facility. The economy was crashing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the shadows of the lower levels, Captain Yunsu watched the chaos unfold from his hidden position, his independent freighter silent. Dawn was one of the few remaining human ships still operating in alien space, but only as observers. His crew had been ordered to monitor the situation and report back to Earth. They never learned to do things themselves. Yunsu muttered to his engineer, a young woman named Kyung-soo, who was scanning the station systems. "We made it too easy for them." The scans showed the devastating truth. The Kaleri, who had once controlled major shipping lanes throughout the galaxy, were struggling with their own outdated vessels. What had taken human ships one day to accomplish now took alien ships an entire week. The efficiency gap was enormous. "Look at this," Kyung-soo said, pointing to her readings. "Their navigation systems are failing because they depended on human quantum computers for calculations. Their ships are breaking down because they never learned to maintain the technology we gave them." Yunsu nodded grimly. It was the same story everywhere they looked. The galaxy had become so dependent on human technology and expertise that they had forgotten how to function independently. Meanwhile, on the war-torn border between the Nexari Empire and the Fourth Republic, ancient conflicts were reigniting. With devastating consequences, both species had grown accustomed to humans solving their territorial disputes with impossible solutions that somehow worked for everyone. Commander Bioram led a covert human observation team from a cloaked vessel positioned just outside the combat zone. Her advanced stealth technology made her ship completely invisible to alien sensors, allowing her to witness the destruction without being detected. The battle raging before them was brutal and pointless. Nexari warships, with their elegant curved designs, traded fire with the blocky utilitarian vessels of the Fourth Republic. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as both sides threw everything they had at each other. "Should we help them?" asked Lieutenant Kyung-ho, her second-in-command, watching the carnage with obvious distress. "They are dying for nothing out there." "No," Bioram replied firmly, her voice cold with resolve. "They chose to treat us as servants instead of equals. Now they must face the consequences of their choices." The young lieutenant looked troubled, but he understood the logic. For centuries, humans had prevented these exact conflicts through careful diplomacy and compromise. Now, without human mediators, the old hatreds were surfacing again. On the Nexari flagship, Emperor Crixus himself commanded the battle. His species were proud warriors who had once conquered half the galaxy before humans had convinced them to pursue peaceful expansion instead. Now, with humans gone, the old ways were returning. "The enemy shows no signs of retreat, Your Majesty," reported his tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Vexkun. "They are fighting with the desperation of cornered animals." "Good," Crixus snarled, his 4 eyes glowing with battle fury. "Then we shall show them what happens when they challenge the Empire without their human protectors." But the Vorth were equally determined. Supreme General Mordek commanded their forces from his massive dreadnought, and he had no intention of backing down. The disputed star system contained valuable resources that both species needed. "The humans always forced us to share everything," he growled to his staff officers. "Now we can take what is rightfully ours." The battle continued for days with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Both fleets were roughly equal in strength, and without human tactical advice they were fighting with outdated strategies and poor coordination. Back on Earth, the human leadership watched the conflict through their observation teams. President Mi-young studied the casualty reports with a heavy heart, but she remained committed to the decision. "They need to learn that actions have consequences," she told her advisors in the secure briefing room beneath Seoul. "We cannot keep saving them from themselves." Dr. Chan-woo, the head of the science division, nodded in agreement. "Our psychological profiles predicted this exact scenario. They have never learned to resolve conflicts independently because we always did it for them." The Galaxy Council was meeting in emergency session every single day, but their efforts to maintain order were failing spectacularly. Without human translators, communication between species was breaking down rapidly. The sophisticated translation systems that had allowed thousands of different species to understand each other were failing. Counselor Lex stood at the central podium trying to maintain order as representatives shouted at each other in languages that were becoming increasingly incomprehensible. The universal translator that humans had provided was degrading without maintenance. We must find a way to contact the humans, he declared, his reptilian voice strained with desperation. Our entire civilization depends on their return, but how do we reach them? Asked the insectoid representative from the hive worlds, clicking her mandibles anxiously. They have completely sealed themselves off from the galaxy. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Every attempt to penetrate human space had failed completely. The barriers protecting human territory were beyond anything the galaxy had ever encountered on the industrial world of Gamma Centauri. The manufacturing centers that had supplied advanced technology to the galaxy for centuries stood idle. Factory manager Silvez, a multi-armed alien who had worked closely with human engineers for decades, stared at the silent assembly lines. Without human-designed components, we cannot produce anything, she reported to the planetary government. The factories are useless without their expertise. The same scenario was playing out on thousands of worlds across the galaxy. The economic networks that connected civilizations were collapsing as human-managed systems went offline. Transportation networks ground to a halt. Communication systems failed. Medical facilities ran out of supplies. Dr. Min-Su monitored the galactic communication networks from his post on Luna base. The data was overwhelming. Every major system was failing simultaneously. The cascade effect is accelerating, he reported to his superiors. Trade is down by 80%. Interstellar communication has dropped by 60%. Medical emergencies are increasing exponentially. The most advanced ships in the galaxy were breaking down because their crews had never learned to maintain human-designed technology. The most sophisticated computer systems were failing because they required human quantum processors to function properly. In the Andromeda sector, a refugee crisis was spiraling out of control. Millions of beings were fleeing worlds where the infrastructure was collapsing, but there was nowhere for them to go. The refugee camps that humans had managed were closing down. Captain Singmin commanded a human observation ship monitoring the crisis from the edge of the sector. Through his sensors, he could see the massive refugee fleets drifting helplessly in space. Their ships were overcrowded and running low on supplies. They are dying out there, he reported to his commanding officer, Admiral Park Jun. Should we not at least provide humanitarian aid? Our orders are clear, Admiral Park Jun replied, though his voice carried obvious regret. We observe only. We cannot interfere until they learn to solve their own problems. The refugee crisis was spreading as more worlds lost their basic services. Billions of beings were suffering as the carefully maintained infrastructure of galactic civilization crumbled. Food distribution networks failed, leaving entire populations hungry. Power grids collapsed, plunging worlds into darkness. On the Galaxy Council, the panic was reaching new levels. Representatives who had once been proud and confident now looked desperate and frightened. The chamber that had once buzzed with the energy of a thriving civilization now felt like a tomb. We are witnessing the end of our civilization, Counselor Vex announced, his voice heavy with defeat. Unless we can somehow bring the humans back, everything we have built will be lost. But in the depths of human space, protected by barriers that made them completely untouchable, the humans were thriving. Their colonies were self-sufficient, their technology was advancing, and their people were finally free from the burden of maintaining an ungrateful galaxy. The age of human servitude was truly over. The question was whether the galaxy could survive long enough to learn from its mistakes. 18 months had passed since humanity withdrew from galactic society, and the once mighty Galaxy Council faced complete dissolution. The great chamber that had once buzzed with the energy of 1,000 civilizations now stood nearly empty, as most member species had withdrawn to focus on their own survival. The few remaining representatives sat in scattered groups, their proud bearing replaced by desperation and fear. The universal translator system had finally failed completely, forcing different species to communicate through primitive hand signals and crude pictographs. Counselor Thex stood at the central podium looking like a shadow of his former self. His scales had dulled to a sickly gray and his voice cracked with exhaustion. As he addressed the nearly empty chamber fellow representatives, he began, though barely 50 beings remained in the vast space that had once held thousands. We are witnessing the end of our civilization. The wars that had erupted without human mediation was spreading like wildfire across the galaxy. The Nexari Empire had shattered into a dozen warring factions, each fighting for control of the remaining resources. The Fourth Republic had collapsed entirely, leaving billions of beings without government or protection. Most tragic of all were the countless worlds where infrastructure had simply stopped working without human-maintained systems. Power grids failed, hospitals closed, and entire populations faced starvation. Billions of innocent beings were paying the price for their leaders' pride, but in the depths of despair, a small group of alien leaders had begun to form a secret coalition. Unlike the proud council members who still clung to their dignity, these beings were willing to admit the truth about their dependence on humanity. Commander Rax of the Kaleri had become the unofficial leader of this group. His successful contact with human border patrols had given him unique insights into what humanity might be willing to accept. We cannot approach them as we did before, he told his fellow conspirators in a hidden meeting room on the neutral world of Sanctuary Station. We must come to them not as rulers demanding service, but as students begging for knowledge. The group included representatives from a dozen species, all of whom had reached the same conclusion independently. Their civilizations were dying, and only humanity could save them, but salvation would require abandoning everything they had believed about their own superiority. D'Argela had joined the group, bringing with her the devastating research that proved humanity had been secretly supporting galactic civilization for centuries. Her data showed that without human intervention, the galaxy would collapse within months. Look at these projections, she told the assembled leaders, displaying holographic charts that painted a grim picture. Agricultural systems are failing on hundreds of worlds, medical facilities are shutting down, transportation networks are grinding to a halt. The evidence was overwhelming. The galaxy had perhaps 6 months before complete societal collapse. Even worlds that had not been directly involved in wars were suffering as the complex web of interdependence that humanity had maintained began to unravel. We need to try something different, Commander Rax decided. His previous message to the humans had received a response of sorts. Captain Jinwoo had been ordered to monitor their communications, but not to engage this time. They would need to be more direct. The coalition prepared a new mission unlike anything attempted before. Instead of sending military vessels or diplomatic ships, they would send a single small craft carrying only essential supplies and a message of complete surrender. The ship they chose was an old cargo freighter that had been modified to carry refugees. The hull was scarred from years of use and the systems were basic but functional. It looked nothing like the proud warships that had tried to penetrate human space. Commander Rax piloted the ship himself, accompanied only by a small crew of volunteers who understood they might not return. The journey to human space took 3 weeks, traveling through sectors that had once been busy trade routes but were now empty and dark as they approached the shimmering barriers that protected human territory. Rax began broadcasting on all frequencies. His message was simple but revolutionary. We surrender, we admit our failures, we beg for your mercy. We offer ourselves as students. If you will teach us, we have nothing left to give except our willingness to learn. The message was received by Captain Jinwoo, who had been monitoring the border for months. He had watched the galaxy tear itself apart, and despite his orders he felt sympathy for the suffering beings. This is different, he reported to Admiral Hyjin. They are not demanding anything. They are offering to submit completely to human authority if we will help them survive. The message created intense debate within human leadership. President Mi-young called emergency sessions with her cabinet as reports poured in from across the galaxy. The situation was worse than they had imagined. The casualty reports are staggering, reported Dr. Chanwu. Billions are dead or dying. Infrastructure collapse is accelerating at this rate. There will be no galactic civilization left to save. But Defense Minister Park Jin urged caution. We cannot simply return to the old system, he argued. If We give in now, they will take us for granted again. As soon as the crisis passes, the debate raged for days as more alien ships arrived at the human barriers. Each carried the same message of surrender and plea for mercy. The beings aboard were not proud warriors or cunning diplomats, but desperate refugees, begging for help. Lieutenant Su Min monitored the refugee ships from her border station, and her heart ached at what she saw through her sensors. She could see families, huddled and overcrowded compartments, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. These are not the same aliens who treated us as servants, she reported to her superiors. These are broken people who have lost everything. They are genuinely asking for our help. The human population was divided. Young people who had grown up hearing stories of galactic cooperation favored immediate intervention. Older generations who remembered the years of being taken for granted were more cautious. Dr. So Young organized massive public rallies, calling for humanitarian aid. Her speeches moved millions of humans to demand action. We cannot let our pride cause the deaths of billions, she declared to a crowd of 100,000 in Seoul. We are better than that. We are human. But President Mi Young knew that the decision would shape the future of galactic civilization for centuries to come. If humanity returned too quickly, the old patterns would reassert themselves. If they waited too long, there would be no civilization left to save. The breakthrough came when Commander Rax made a final desperate transmission directly to President Mi Young herself, using communication codes that Dr. Jayla had discovered in old human diplomatic records. Madam President, he said, his voice breaking with emotion, we know we do not deserve your help. We know we treated you as servants when you were our saviors. We know we took credit for your achievements and gave you nothing in return. He paused, struggling to continue. We are not asking you to fix our problems. We are asking you to teach us how to fix them ourselves. We offer to place our entire civilization under human guidance. If you will help us learn to be worthy of independence. The message was broadcast across human space, and the response was immediate. Millions of humans demanded that their government respond to the desperate plea. Young people organized protests calling for immediate humanitarian intervention. President Mi Young realized that the moment for decision had arrived. The galaxy was dying and only humanity could save it, but this time they would not return as servants or even as equals. They would return as teachers and guides for species that had finally learned humility. The age of human servitude was truly over. The age of human leadership was about to begin. 2 years had passed since humanity first vanished from galactic society, and the moment of decision had finally arrived. President Mi Young stood in the command center beneath Seoul, surrounded by her most trusted advisors as they prepared to reshape the galaxy forever. The reports from the collapsing civilization were devastating. Entire star systems had gone dark as their infrastructure failed. Billions of beings were dead or dying. Wars raged across dozens of worlds. The proud species that had once ruled the galaxy were now reduced to begging for survival. But their pleas had changed. The arrogant demands of the early months had been replaced by genuine humility and desperate offers of complete surrender. The galaxy had finally learned that it could not survive without human help. We are not going back as servants, President Mi Young announced to her cabinet. We are not going back as mediators or problem solvers. We are going back as teachers and leaders of a new galactic order. The decision had been made after months of debate within human society. The younger generation had won the argument that humanity had a moral obligation to help, but it would be help on human terms. The galaxy would be rebuilt, but under human guidance. Fleet Admiral Haijin received her orders with a mixture of relief and determination. She had spent 2 years watching the galaxy destroy itself, and she was ready to end the suffering. Her massive fleet had been prepared for this moment. All ships prepare for emergence, she commanded from her flagship, the massive carrier Soul Pride. This is not a rescue mission. This is the beginning of a new era. Barriers around human space began to lower for the first time in 24 months, and what emerged shocked the galaxy beyond imagination. The human fleet that appeared was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Instead of the familiar diplomatic vessels that had once carried human ambassadors to alien worlds, the ships were massive floating cities equipped with hospitals, schools, factories, and everything needed to rebuild a shattered civilization. Admiral Haijin broadcast her message to the waiting galaxy on all frequencies. Her words were calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. We Have heard your pleas for help, she began, and we have decided to return, but we are not coming back to fix your problems. We are coming back to teach you how to fix them yourselves, the massive human ships, spread out across the galaxy bringing humanitarian aid to the most desperate worlds, but the aid came with conditions that would have been unthinkable to the proud species of the past stone. The industrial world of Kepler Prime, where millions were starving after the collapse of the food distribution system, the human relief ship Bizan arrived with enough supplies to feed the entire population. But the aid came with teachers. Dr. Taehyun stepped off the transport ship onto the alien world carrying nothing but a simple data pad and a determination to change everything. He had been chosen to head the new Galactic Education Initiative, and his mission was revolutionary. You will not simply receive our food, he told the assembled alien leaders. You will learn to produce it yourselves. You will learn to manage distribution systems. You will learn to maintain the technology that makes it all possible. The aliens who had once been proud rulers of industrial empires now sat in classrooms like children, learning basic principles of resource management and logistics. Dr. Taehyun was patient but firm in his teaching methods on the war-torn border between the former Nexari Empire and Fourth Republic. Human peacekeepers arrived not to stop the fighting, but to teach the combatants how to negotiate. Captain Biorem, who had watched the conflict for months, now stepped forward to mediate. We will not impose a solution on you, she told the exhausted military commanders from both sides. You will learn to find your own solutions. We will teach you the methods, but you must do the work. The process was slow and painful. Many of the massive crystal chamber of the Galaxy Council buzzed with the usual sounds of 1,000 different alien species talking at once. The morning light from 3 different suns filtered through the transparent walls, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. Representatives from across the galaxy filled the tiered seats, their various forms creating a colorful tapestry of scales, feathers, fur, and stranger materials. At the center of it all stood the human diplomatic podium where Ambassador Dongmin waited in perfect stillness. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his formal Earth uniform displayed the insignia of the Terran Federation. For 300 years, humans had stood at this very spot solving problems that seemed impossible. To everyone else, today would be different. The great bell chimed and the chamber fell silent. Thousands of alien eyes turned toward the human representative. They expected another miracle, another impossible solution to some galactic crisis. They had grown comfortable with human competence, comfortable with always having someone else fix their problems. Dongmin stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the advanced sound system that humans had designed and installed decades ago. His words were calm, but they hit the chamber like a meteor strike. The Terran Federation formally withdraws from all diplomatic relations with the Galaxy Council, he announced, effective immediately. Humanity will no longer participate in any galactic affairs. We are done. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then chaos erupted. Counselor Thex, the reptilian representative from the Fourth Republic, shot to his feet. His massive form towered over his desk, and his scales shifted from green to angry red. You cannot simply abandon your duties, he roared. His voice was so loud it made the crystal walls vibrate. The peace treaties, the trade agreements, the border disputes. Humans mediate everything. The insectoid ambassador from the hive worlds clicked her mandibles rapidly in distress. What about the Kaleri-Nexari conflict? You promised to resolve it next week. Without human intervention, those 2 species will start shooting each other again. From the upper tiers came the melodic but panicked voice of the ethereal collective representative. Our entire economic system depends on human trade routes and logistics. If you leave now, billions of beings will starve. Dongmin listened to the growing panic with no emotion on his face. He had expected this reaction. The galaxy had become so dependent on human help that they could not imagine functioning without it. They treated humans like servants, like tools to be used whenever problems arose. They never bothered to learn how to solve things themselves. The chamber erupted into shouting matches between different species. Some blamed others for driving the humans away. Some demanded emergency measures to force humanity back into service. A few wise voices tried to call for calm, but they were drowned out by the chaos through it all. Dongmin waited, When the noise finally died down enough for him to speak, he delivered his final message. For 3 centuries we have served as your mediators, your problem solvers, your emergency responders. We have prevented countless wars, fed billions of hungry beings, and maintained peace across 10,000 worlds. And how have you repaid? Yuge paused, letting the question hang in the air. You have treated us as servants. You give us your problems and demand we fix them. You take credit for our solutions. You use our technology and call it your own. You have never once asked what we need or want. You simply expect us to always be there. The truth of his words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Many representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew he was right, but they had never thought about it that way before. We are not your servants, Dongmin continued. We are not your tools. We are free people, and we choose to be free. From this council, from this day forward, solve your own problems with that. He turned and walked toward the exit. His small escort of human marines fell into step behind him. Their movements were precise and professional, showing no emotion despite the historic moment. Wait, Counselor, Thex called after him desperately. You cannot just leave. What about the Outer Rim rebellion? What about the food shortages on Kepler 7? What about the refugee crisis in the Andromeda sector? Dongmin paused at the chamber doors. Without turning around, he spoke his final words to the Galaxy Council. Those are your problems. Now figure them out yourselves. The doors closed behind the human delegation. With a soft hiss, the chamber fell into stunned silence as the reality of the situation sank in. Humanity was gone. The species that had held the galaxy together for 3 centuries had just walked away on Earth, billions of light years away. Fleet Admiral Hai-Jin watched the broadcast from her command center. Deep beneath the Korean peninsula, her weathered face showed no emotion as she witnessed the end of an era. She had been preparing for this moment for decades. The massive command center buzzed with activity as human officers monitored communication networks across the galaxy. Already, they could see the first signs of panic spreading like wildfire from world to world. Admiral Hai-Jin turned to her communications officer, a young woman named Sora, who had been tracking alien responses to the withdrawal announcement. What are you seeing, Lieutenant? She asked. Panic spreading across all major networks, ma'am. Sora reported emergency sessions being called on dozens of worlds. The Kaleri have already mobilized their fleets, thinking the Nexari will attack now that humans are not mediating. The Fourth Republic is recalling all their ambassador. Shai-Jin nodded grimly. It was exactly as they had predicted. The galaxy had become so dependent on human intervention that they had forgotten how to function independently. She walked to the main console and placed her hand on the activation scanner. The scanner read her biometrics and a soft female voice announced, Admiral Hai-Jin authenticated Protocol 0 standing by. This was the moment that would change everything. The protocol that had been developed in secret over 50 years of careful planning. Every human colony, every space station, every ship, every communication relay had been modified for this day. Activate Protocol 0. She commanded across human space. The most advanced civilization in the galaxy simply vanished from galactic society. Communication networks went dark, trade routes closed, diplomatic channels fell silent, even the quantum entanglement communicators that allowed instant communication across vast distances went offline. On Luna Base, Commander Jae-Sung received the Protocol 0 activation signal and immediately began the shutdown sequence. Every system that connected human space to the outside galaxy was severed. The barrier generators came online, creating an impenetrable shield around human territory. The barriers were based on technology that the rest of the galaxy could not even begin to understand. Humans had discovered how to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself, while other species had spent centuries fighting each other. Humans had quietly become masters of space and time. Dr. Yoon Young, the lead physicist on the Barrier Project, watched her instruments as the shields activated perfectly around every human world. The energy readings were stable, and the barriers were holding. Nothing could get in or out without human permission. On Mars, the industrial centers that had supplied the galaxy with advanced technology for centuries shut down their export operations. Director Min-ho oversaw the process with mixed emotions. He knew this was necessary, but he also knew that billions of alien beings would suffer without human manufactured goods. The mining operations on the asteroid belt ceased. All shipments to alien worlds The agricultural worlds that had fed half the galaxy sealed their borders. The medical facilities that had provided life-saving treatments to countless species closed their doors to outsiders in. The span of 6 hours humanity had completely withdrawn from galactic civilization. The most technologically advanced, economically powerful, and diplomatically important species in the galaxy had become unreachable. Back on the Galaxy Council, the full impact of the human withdrawal was becoming clear. The emergency session had devolved into chaos as species blamed each other for the crisis. The sophisticated translation systems that humans had provided began failing without maintenance. Within hours, representatives could barely understand each other. Economic networks that connected thousands of worlds started collapsing as human-managed systems went offline. The transportation networks that moved goods across the galaxy ground to a halt without human logistics. The communication systems that allowed instant contact between distant worlds fell silent. Counselor Dex stood at the podium where Dongmin had delivered his devastating announcement just hours ago. This chamber had been the center of galactic civilization. Now it felt like a tomb. Fellow representatives, he began, his voice heavy with defeat. We must face the truth. Without humanity, we are lost. We must find a way to bring them back, no matter what it takes. But deep in human space, protected by barriers that made them untouchable, the humans were already adapting to their new isolation. They had prepared for this day for decades. They could thrive completely independently while the galaxy that had taken them for granted struggled to survive. The age of human servitude was over. The question was whether the galaxy could learn to function without them. 6 months had passed since humanity vanished from galactic society, and the situation had become desperate beyond anything the galaxy had ever experienced. The proud leaders who had once ruled vast interstellar empires were now reduced to begging for help from a species they had treated as servants on the throne world of the GalaXY Empire. Emperor Crixus paced back and forth in his war room like a caged predator. His 4 eyes burned with frustration as he studied the holographic displays showing the collapse of his realm. The war with the Fourth Republic had dragged on for months with no clear victor, and his empire was bleeding resources. Your Majesty, reported General Vexkun, bowing deeply before his emperor. Our forces are running low on ammunition and supplies. The manufacturing worlds cannot produce what we need without human technology. Chris stopped pacing and turned to face his most trusted commander. The Emperor was a massive being even by GalaXY standards, with thick, armored hide and claws that could tear through metal. His pride had always been his greatest strength, but now it was becoming his weakness. Then, we must swallow our pride, he said through gritted teeth. Find the humans, offer them anything they want. Territory, resources, even a share of political power in the Empire. We need them back. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. The GalaXY had never bowed to anyone in their 1,000-year history, but without human mediation and technology, his empire was crumbling. His people were suffering, and his enemies were growing. Stronger Admiral Zex Thor, the commander of the Imperial fleet, received his orders with mixed emotions. He had always respected human capabilities, but he had never imagined they were so vital to galactic civilization. Prepare the fastest ships we have, he ordered his staff. We leave for human space immediately. The GalaXY fleet that departed for human territory was unlike anything they had ever assembled before. Instead of weapons of war, they carried gifts and tribute. Rare minerals, precious artifacts, and formal offers of alliance filled their cargo holds. But when they reached the edge of human space, they encountered something that shattered their understanding of reality. Every human world, every space station, every colony was protected by energy barriers that made them completely unreachable. The barriers shimmered with colors that hurt to look at directly, and they extended far beyond the planets themselves, creating massive spheres of protection around entire star systems. The GalaXY ships approached cautiously, their sensors straining to analyze the phenomenon. What are we looking at? Asked Captain Velrix, commanding the lead vessel. His bridge crew stared in amazement at the readings. I do not know, sir, replied his science officer, a young GalaXY named Kixmar. The barriers are composed of energy types that our instruments cannot identify. They seem to be manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe itself. The fleet tried everything they could think of to penetrate the barriers, Quantum torpedoes exploded harmlessly against the shields. Dimensional rift generators failed to create even the smallest opening reality-bending weapons that could tear holes in space-time itself had no effect whatsoever on Earth. Dr. Yoon monitored the alien attempts to breach their defenses from her laboratory deep beneath the Korean peninsula. Her instruments showed every attack being absorbed and neutralized by the barrier system. They are trying everything, she reported to the High Council. Quantum weapons, dimensional attacks, even attempts to manipulate time itself, nothing is working. The barriers were the result of humanity's greatest scientific achievement. While the other species had spent centuries fighting each other, humans had quietly unlocked the secrets of reality itself. They had learned to manipulate the fundamental forces that held the universe together. President Mi-young studied the reports from her secure bunker. The desperation of the alien species was obvious, but she remained firm in her resolve. Let them exhaust themselves, she decided. They need to understand that we are not their servants anymore. When they are ready to treat us as equals, perhaps we can negotiate. Meanwhile, on the GalaXY Council, the panic had reached unprecedented levels. The emergency sessions that had been called daily were now running around the clock as representatives tried desperately to find solutions to problems they had never had to face before. Counselor Thex stood at the central podium looking older and more exhausted than he had ever appeared in his long career. His scales had lost their vibrant color and his voice cracked. With strained fellow representatives, he began. The situation is beyond critical. Trade has collapsed by 90%. Communication networks are failing across the galaxy. Wars are breaking out on dozens of worlds. The chamber was only half full now. Many species had withdrawn from the council to focus on their own survival. The universal translator system was barely functioning, making communication between different species nearly impossible. We must face the truth, he continued, his voice heavy. With defeat, we cannot function without human involvement. We need them more than our pride. The admission sent shockwaves through the remaining representatives. For centuries, they had believed themselves to be the masters of galactic civilization. Now, they were learning that they had been entirely dependent on human competence. D'Argela, a brilliant Kaleri scientist, had been working around the clock in her laboratory trying to understand how the galaxy had become so dependent on humanity. Her research was revealing uncomfortable truths that challenged everything they thought they knew. Look at this, she told her research team, displaying holographic records on the main screen. Every major breakthrough in the last 3 centuries, every solution to impossible problems, every piece of technology that made modern life possible, it all came from humans. The evidence was overwhelming. When the Vorth had developed their new faster-than-light drives, the core technology had been secretly provided by human scientists. When the Nexari had created their advanced weapons systems, human engineers had designed them. When the Kaleri had solved their energy crisis, human physicists had provided the solution. We just took credit for it, Dr. Jela said, her voice filled with shame. We let them do all the work and then claimed it as our own achievement. Her assistant, a young scientist named Kelmore, stared at the data in disbelief. But why did they let us take credit? Why did they not demand recognition for their work? Because they were trying to help us maintain our dignity, Dr. Jela replied. They knew that if we realized how dependent we were on them, it would destroy our self-respect. So they worked in secret. The revelation was spreading through the scientific community and the implications were staggering. The galaxy had not advanced technologically in 3 centuries without human input. Every apparent breakthrough had been the result of human innovation disguised as alien achievement. On the refugee world of Haven 7, millions of displaced beings struggled to survive in overcrowded camps. The infrastructure was collapsing and supplies were running dangerously low. Commander Yulsen tried to maintain order, but the situation was becoming hopeless. The water purification systems are failing, she reported to the planetary government. The food distribution networks have collapsed. We cannot support this many people. Haven 7 had once been a model refugee world where humans had quietly managed the logistics of caring for displaced populations. Now, without human expertise, the camp was descending into chaos. In the medical facilities that had once provided life-saving treatments to countless species across the galaxy, the doctors were helpless without human-designed equipment. Dr. Morkex, a respected Vorth physician, stared at the inactive medical scanners in his hospital. These machines are useless without human maintenance protocols, he told his staff. We cannot even diagnose basic illnesses anymore. The same scenario was playing out on thousands of worlds. Medical knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries was worthless without the human technology that supported its. Surgery that had once been routine was now impossible. Disease outbreaks that had been controlled for generations were returning with deadly force. Back on Earth, the human leadership was fully aware of the suffering their withdrawal was causing. Fleet Admiral Hyjin received daily reports about the collapsing GalaXY, but she remained committed to the decision. They need to learn that actions have consequences, she told her staff in the command center. We cannot keep enabling their dependence on us, many humans especially. The younger generation were troubled by the suffering they were witnessing. Lieutenant Sumin, stationed on a border monitoring post, watched alien refugee ships fleeing from wars that humanity could easily stop. They are dying out there, she told her commanding officer, Colonel Jungwoo. Doesn't that mean something? It means they need to learn to solve their own problems, came the hard reply. We are not their parents. The debate was raging throughout human space. Many believed that isolation was the only way to force the GalaXY to become independent. Others argued that humanity had a moral obligation to help regardless of how they were treated. President Myung understood both sides of the argument, but she knew that returning too quickly would only restore the old system of dependence. The GalaXY needed to learn to function without human intervention, even if the lesson was painful. The barriers around human space remained impenetrable, and the GalaXY continued its slow collapse toward chaos. The age of human servitude was truly over, but the question remained whether the GalaXY could survive long enough to learn from its mistakes. 1 year had passed since humanity vanished from galactic society, and the truth was finally becoming impossible to ignore. Dr. Jayla worked tirelessly in her laboratory on Calari Prime, surrounded by mountains of classified records that painted a picture so shocking it challenged everything the GalaXY believed about itself. Her research team had grown to include scientists from dozens of species, all working together to understand how their civilizations had become so utterly dependent on humanity. The answers they found were devastating to their pride, but impossible to deny. Look at this, Shayla said to her colleagues as she projected a holographic timeline onto the main display. This shows every major technological advancement in the GalaXY over the past 3 centuries. The timeline was color-coded, with blue representing genuine alien achievements and red representing human contributions. The results were overwhelming. Red dominated the entire display while blue appeared only in tiny scattered dots. Every breakthrough that made modern life possible came from humans. She continued, her voice heavy with the weight of discovery. Faster than light communication, quantum computing, medical nanotechnology, energy shields, artificial gravity, even the air recycling systems on our ships. Dr. Kelmore, her young assistant, stared at the data in disbelief. But we have records of our own scientists making these discoveries, our history books. Credit our own. Pio Plazella pulled up another set of records showing the real story. Human scientists had been working behind the scenes for centuries, feeding their discoveries through alien research teams to maintain the illusion that other species were capable of advancement. They would give US 90% of the solution, she explained, and let us figure out the final 10%. Then we would announce it as our own achievement while they quietly moved on to solving the next impossible problem. The evidence was documented in secret human files that had been leaked by sympathetic sources within the barriers. Human physicists had solved the energy crisis that had plagued the Calari for generations. Human engineers had designed the weapons that made the Nexari Empire powerful. Human doctors had created the medical treatments that saved billions of lives. We were living a lie, Jayla said quietly. Every achievement we were proud of, every advancement we celebrated, was really human work disguised as our own. The revelation was spreading through the scientific community like wildfire, and the implications were staggering. The GalaXY had not made a single major technological breakthrough in 3 centuries without human input. Every apparent success had been the result of human innovation. Meanwhile, deep in human space, the leadership was debating their next move. President Myung sat in her secure conference room surrounded by her most trusted advisors. The reports from the collapsing galaxy were growing more desperate by the day. How long can we maintain this isolation? She asked her cabinet members. The suffering out there is becoming severe. Dr. Shanwu, the head of the science division, consulted his datapad before responding. Forever, if necessary, Madame President. Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. We have achieved complete energy independence. Our food production is sustainable, and our population is thriving. The barriers protecting human space were more than just shields, they were proof of humanity mastery over the fundamental forces of reality. While other species had spent their time fighting and competing, humans had quietly become masters of physics itself. But the isolation was not without cost. Many humans, especially those who had worked closely with alien species, were questioning whether cutting off the galaxy had been the right choice. Lieutenant Su Min was among those struggling with the decision. She stood at the observation deck of Border Station 7, watching through powerful telescopes as alien refugee ships drifted helplessly in space. Their vessels were overcrowded and failing, and many would not survive the journey to safety. They are dying out there, she told her commanding officer, Captain Dongwu. For the 100th time in recent weeks, children and innocent civilians, who never did anything wrong to us. Captain Dongwu was a veteran of the diplomatic corps who had spent decades working with alien species. He understood her feelings because he shared them, but he also understood the bigger picture. It means they need to learn to solve their own problems. He replied, though his voice carried obvious pain, we cannot keep enabling their dependence on us. If we save them now, they will never learn to be independent. The debate was raging throughout human society. Social media networks buzzed with arguments about whether humanity had a moral obligation to help, regardless of how they had been treated. Protests were held in major cities on Earth, with some demanding immediate humanitarian intervention. Dr. So Young, the chief ethics advisor to the government, had become a vocal advocate for returning to help the galaxy. Her speeches were gaining support among younger humans who had grown up believing in their responsibility to help others. We are not like them, she argued during a public debate. We do not abandon others just because they have wronged us. That is what makes us human. Our compassion is our greatest strength. But President Myung remained firm in her resolve. She knew that returning too quickly would only restore the old system where humans did everything while aliens took credit. If we go back now, nothing will change, she told her advisors. They will just take us for granted again. We need to wait until they are ready to treat us as true equals. The situation in the galaxy was becoming increasingly desperate. The Nixari Empire was fragmenting as worlds declared independence rather than continue supporting the failing war effort. Emperor Crixus had been forced to recall his fleets from human space after months of futile attempts to penetrate the barriers. The Fourth Republic was faring no better. Supreme General Mordic had been overthrown by his own officers who blamed him for the disastrous war. The new leadership was struggling to maintain basic order as their infrastructure continued to collapse. On the Galaxy Council, the remaining representatives were reduced to begging for help from species they had once considered inferior. The proud aliens who had once ruled the galaxy were now desperate for any assistance they could find. We must try a different approach, Councillor Thex announced during yet another emergency session. Perhaps if we formally apologize for our treatment of humanity, they might consider returning. But how do we even contact them? Asked the insectoid representative. Her species had lost contact with most of their colonies as communication networks failed. The barriers around human space make it impossible to send messages. The answer came from an unexpected source. Commander Rax, a humble Calari officer who had worked closely with human peacekeepers during the border conflicts, suggested a radical approach. We must go to them in person. He proposed, not as conquerors or negotiators, but as supplicants. We must admit our failures and ask for their forgiveness. The suggestion was met with resistance from the prouder species, but desperation was making them more willing to consider options they would have rejected before. Commander Rax volunteered to lead a small diplomatic mission to human space. His ship would carry no weapons and no demands, only a simple message of apology and a request for help. The mission launched a week later with representatives from 12 different species aboard a single unarmed vessel. They approached the human barriers not as proud galactic leaders but as humble petitioners seeking mercy using an ancient human communication frequency that racks had discovered in old records. They broadcast a simple message continuously as they approached the barriers. "We were wrong. We apologize. Please help us learn." The message was detected by Captain Jinwoo, who was patrolling the border in his advanced stealth cruiser for the first time in months. He was hearing genuine humility from alien voices instead of demands or threats. "Admiral," he reported to his superiors, "I think we have something different here. These aliens are actually asking for help to learn, not demanding that we fix their problems." The message created a stir in human leadership circles. It was the first sign that some aliens might be ready to change their approach to dealing with humanity. President Mi-young called an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss the implications. "This could be the beginning of real change," she told her advisors. "But we must be careful not to fall back into the old patterns. They need to prove they are serious about learning." The debate continued as the galaxy burned, but for the first time in over a year, there was a glimmer of hope that a new relationship might be possible.